I talk about modifying knitting patterns all the time. I like putting my own spin on things, and one of the biggest ways that I do this is by using a different yarn than the one that's called for in the pattern. Either I don't have it, or I want to use something from my stash, or I want to use Fiber for the People yarn. One way or another, I find a reason or have a reason, or just follow through with a yarn that's different than what the pattern calls for. So to say I don't modify patterns often would, I guess, be in some ways untrue, but I do tend to gravitate towards and choose patterns to knit that I don't feel the need to change the design or the overall structure at all. I like things that feel kind of packaged and ready to go, right here telling me exactly what to do so that I can create exactly what I see with my eyeballs. And this sweater, albeit unfinished, is just that. Hi, my name is Taylor, and today I am sharing with you a mid-project review of the Terrazzo Sweater by PetiteKnit. Also, just a quick note, I am fully aware that this is unfinished, slightly cropped, and technically not ready to be worn in public, and I will absolutely be wearing it for the duration of the video, so we're all just going to move past that together. This is my second sweater from Met of PetiteKnit, and I've knit a few of her other patterns: hats, socks, simple things. And I kind of know what I'm getting into at this point, at least a little bit, considering in the vast scale of her body of work, I've knit a very small portion of that, but I understand what you get from a package of PetiteKnit. I like the aesthetic. I like the clean lines. I like that nothing feels overly fussy and overworked. And for me, personally, the shapes tend to work. Met, PetiteKnit, and I have a similar kind of build. So I can look at her sample and have a pretty good sense of how that's going to translate onto me. And I also know that's not the case for everyone. And I do understand that that gives me a bit of an advantage in terms of not needing to modify things for fit. But for me, that's part of why I choose patterns like this. They already line up with what I want, both literally and in terms of overall vibe. Now, normally this is where I would swap yarn. That's usually my default move. But in this case, I didn't. I'm actually using the yarn called for in the pattern. Well, half of the yarn called for in the pattern. The other half is essentially the same thing for all intents and purposes. The main yarn used in the pattern is Noro Silk Garden Sock Solo in the Omitama colorway, and I'm pairing this with a skein of Kid Mohair Silk by Fiber for the People in the Eucalyptus colorway. It's essentially the same pairing that she uses in her pattern. It's just from Fiber for the People and not from, where, let's see, she uses Tin Silk Mohair by Sandnes Garn. Okay, but otherwise, this is the base yarn called for in the pattern. Kind of a unique situation for me. I just don't typically use the exact same yarn and the exact same colorway called for in the pattern. So look at me going out of the box of ordinary. So if you have never used Noro, you know that it has a pretty distinct personality. This one here is single ply. It has those long color transitions, and it can feel a little bit wild on its own. But when I'm holding it together with my Fiber for the People Kid Mohair Silk in that eucalyptus color, it kind of lays this soft haze over everything. So in this case, I didn't try to overthink it, I just followed the pattern. And I am going to insert some up-close shots of the fabric so I don't have to climb on my table and get in front of the screen or in front of the camera. So you'll see it, all right? It's really quite lovely. The only point where I really considered stopping and thinking I was gonna pump the brakes a little bit and make a modification for, I don't even know why I wouldn't have just considered sticking with this, but I was considering changing it. That would be the collar. The collar is knit entirely in half twisted rib. And what that means is that you knit through the back loop and you purl. This isn't that big of a deal. This is not complicated. This is not difficult. It just takes a little longer. And I remember thinking as I was jumping into this, it was almost like this default kind of thing in my mind where I'm like, ooh, we're doing something different. That might take a little bit longer. Do I not just want to do a knit one, purl one, and be done with it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? I get this question in my mind, and sometimes it slows me down unnecessarily. And so there was a moment where I was like, maybe I'll just do a regular 1x1 rib. But then I look at the pattern and I see it, and I know that that is what I want. What I see in this picture is what I want. And part of what I see is a half twisted rib, which is really not that complicated. And so I just stuck it out, and I'm really happy that I did. it just suits the sweater. It doesn't feel like an extra detail. It feels like a part of the whole thing. And I really do love it. Now, I will tell you that after blocking, this is going to open up a little bit more. So this is going to become a little bit wider in this regard. I'm hoping, and I really think that it's going to. Even if it didn't, I mean, it looks lovely the way it is. But it just suits. There's a structure. The vertical ribs here really stand out against that twisted knit stitch background. And I just really love it. It just suits. So happy I stuck it out. Why would I even consider changing it? Well, it's not even that hard. And so the reason I think that this project is working so well comes down to a few things. First, the yarn. I didn't try to get clever with it. I used what was recommended. And I do think that that matters more than we sometimes want it to. The Noro all by itself has a pretty strong personality. The color changes are bold. All of those color changes would stand out a little bit more and probably be a little bit more obviously stripy, kind of giving it like a Missoni look, if you will. But once you hold it with the mohair, it softens everything beautifully. It kind of blurs those transitions, so it reads more like a cohesive fabric. And because this is single ply, the overall sweater has a really nice light drape to it. And that's something that I can see in the image, and it's important to remember. A big part of what you're seeing in those photos in the sample has a lot to do with the yarn that was used. This yarn pairing doesn't feel stiff or overly structured, and I don't know if I would like this sweater as much if the yarn was providing a stiff and overly structured look. This and this just kind of seems to fall the way that I want it to. It's one of those cases where I think if you changed even one part of this pairing or even swapped this out for a single yarn of the weight that you need for your gauge, I just don't think that you would arrive at the same result. Second is the design itself. There's nothing in this design that feels like it's just there to be clever. Even the collar, which with the more standout rib could feel like it's a little extra, actually makes perfect sense when you look at the whole overall sweater. It's all just very considered without being fussy. And the third thing, honestly, is just that I chose it for myself. I already knew I liked the silhouette. I already knew it was a kind of sweater I would actually wear. So I'm not knitting this hoping it works. I'm knitting it knowing what it's supposed to be. And again, having a little bit of an advantage of seeing what it's supposed to be on a human form that is similar to my own. And I want to take a minute here to stop, and I want to mention something. I get how frustrating it must be to be inundated with knitting designs on human forms that look nothing like your own. That is frustrating, to say the least, I can imagine. So I just want you to know that I fully acknowledge that that is an advantage for folks who seem to have a similar shape and size as the person who happens to be sampling the sweater. That is something I acknowledge and I am aware of. And if you do want to discuss that down in the comments section, please go at it in a way that is in good faith and not in a way that would suggest anybody who chooses to support designers like PetiteKnit have no awareness of that, nor do they care, because that is absolutely not true. All right, now in terms of how the design is coming together, the fabric is doing exactly what I expected it to do, thanks to the fact that I chose to use the yarn required in the design. It has a nice drape, it's soft without feeling flimsy, and the mohair is just pulling everything together beautifully. I think this pattern is exceptional for somebody who wants a classic sweater, but still wants it to feel intentional in its design elements. It's not overly complicated, it's not trying to do too much, but it has enough detail that it doesn't feel basic in a boring way, which I think is kind of a big thing about PetiteKnit's patterns, in my opinion. And I think it works in particular for two kinds of knitters. Either someone like me who just wants to follow the pattern as written and trust the results, or someone who does like to modify and wants a really clean, straightforward template to work from. And I think the final thing that really sold me on this design after I had already started it is the fact that I set it down for a few months and walked away completely. And when I came back to it, it felt just like riding a bike. Not because it's overly simple, but because the pattern is very clear. There's nothing in it that makes you feel like you have to relearn what you're working on before you can dive back in. I already trust the pattern. I trust the design. I know I'm going to like where it's going. So there's no friction. If you have to set it down and walk away, when you come back, it's just like continuing. And I think where I've landed with this is just this. I don't think the goal is ever for me to never modify patterns. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. But I do think there's a lot of value in choosing something you already trust, so you don't feel like you have to fix it while you're making it. Because I do think sometimes we modify as a way to control something that we don't trust is going to work for us. And sometimes we modify because we know, given our shape compared to the shape that the design was designed for, it isn't going to work for us. And being able to knit something without modifying it is absolutely a luxury and an advantage. But for me personally, if I can find designs where I don't have to make those kinds of modifications, that in my mind is the sweet spot. And I feel like for me, the Terrazzo sweater is that. It's something I can just simply pick up and knit and chill. And actually, I think for the after show for this episode, I want to talk a little bit more about the discussion on finding designs that you can relate to in terms of your body shape, your body size, your gender, all of this, and how sometimes it's overly frustrating when you feel like you and your type are maybe not represented as much as other types, and how that it can be really difficult to kind of weed through things to find something that you feel truly suits you or that you could picture on yourself. I want to dive into that a little bit. I have some thoughts on that. I know that it's always something that comes up when PetiteKnit comes up in pattern discussions, and I do think it's an important thing to discuss. So over on the Patreon, I'm going to be diving into that on the after show. If you would like to hang out with me and talk a little bit about that, or just listen to me ramble about it, head over to the after show. It's a great way to support the channel, and it means a lot for me to have you there. In the meantime, happy knitting, happy making, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon. Bye.